Chapter 821 I'm afraid I can't help it. Zhu Lark's eyes stared into Zhang Yi's without the slightest bit of retreat. She asked rhetorically, since you can even bring your woman on board and let her enjoy the same treatment as you, then why can't I? That's why I demand that Su Nuanqi's standard of living be the same as mine. Zhang Yi stared at her, silent for at least 4 or 5 seconds. Suddenly he asked, "You're rebelling? What do you mean?" "I was just making a legitimate request." Zhang Yi didn't say much nonsense. "Well then, I agree to the request you made." Zhu Lark and Su Nuanqi's eyes instantly lit up. The duo glanced at each other and couldn't stop rejoicing. Zhu Lark thought to herself, no matter what, you still have to give me some face. Zhang Yi looked to the chef, starting today, lower Miss Zhu's food standard to the same standard as Su that whoever. In an instant, everyone present was dumbfounded. They were all thunderstruck by Zhang Yi's flirty maneuver. Who was Zhu Lark? That was the personal niece of the Supreme Commander of Jiangnan region. Zhang Yi just lowered her food standard? Su Nuanqi was dumbfounded, originally thinking that her cries had been answered and that she could eat better food. In the future, she could make more demands through this opening. Who would have thought that Zhang Yi had lowered the standard of Zhu Lark's food, so that in turn, it was not good for her to make demands? Zhu Lark's eyes stared like bronze bells, her right index finger pointing at Zhang Yi, unable to speak for a long time. "It looks like you're satisfied with this decision as well, and have all acquiesced. Well then, from today onwards, that's how it's going to be." Zhang Yi gave old Tian and the chef a wink, then turned his head and left. The ship was full of his people, and although they would also take care of Zhu Lark's face, once Zhang Yi gave the word, they definitely had to listen. In itself, they didn't like the crying Su Nuanqi, so this was just right. Zhang Yi. Zhang Yi had just left the kitchen when he heard a piercing shout. Zhu Lark was really breaking her defenses. She had even forgotten her agreement with Zhang Yi not to expose Zhang Yi's name outside. This practice made Zhang Yi frown. "Zhang Yi, stop right there. What exactly was the meaning of what you did?" Zhu Lark walked up to Zhang Yi regardless and glared at him in anger. "Were you deliberately trying to trick me?" Zhang Yi looked at her condescendingly, not saying a word. However, amongst his eyes, that unimpressed lethargy had disappeared. A terrifying majesty appeared. He had killed an unknown number of people in his hands, so when he didn't deliberately disguise himself, that kind of killing intent would be naturally released. Zhu Lark was originally in a fit of anger, but now it was like being doused with a pot of cold water over his head, instantly sobering up most of the time, and the sweaty hairs on his back stood up. "Why are you so fierce? It was clearly you who were unreasonable in the first place." "Was I here to reason with you?" Zhang Yi asked back. "Listen if you like, or get away if you don't. I'm not going to spoil your missy's temper. If it wasn't for your eldest uncle's face, do you think I want to sympathize with you? You're so powerful, don't follow me in the beginning, you sailed by yourself." Zhang Yi looked at her with a disgusted face. Zhang Yi's voice wasn't too loud or small, but everyone could hear it. Zhu Lark's face instantly red-warmed. Zhang Yi doing this was tantamount to slapping her face in front of everyone. Su Nuanqi was also so scared that she buried her head low and didn't say a word. Zhang Yi said coldly, "Don't do it again. If you do it again, I'll lock you in the house and won't allow you to come out until you return to land." Zhu Lark knew what Zhang Yi was talking about. Exposing his name outside was a big no-no. Luckily, these people from Rock Flow Island were so well informed that they had not heard of his name as the Jiangnan killing god. Otherwise, Zhang Yi didn't know what tactics he would have taken to avoid the news of his sea voyage being exposed. "It was my fault for calling you by your name, but you're at fault too." Zhu Lark seemed to be somewhat intimidated by Zhang Yi, and her tone became gentle. She began to try to reason with Zhang Yi about her. "You were able to bring Zhou Kir on board last week, but you pushed back when I was looking for an assistant to help me with my child. Are you having a problem with me?" Zhu Lark stubbornly angled her neck and asked defiantly. Zhang Yi sneered and asked back, "So what if I just have a problem with you? Zhu Lark? Zhang Yi said nonchalantly, your eldest uncle Zhu Jing doesn't even have an opinion on who I bring on board. Why are you so full of shit? You're menopausal. What kind of relationship do you think we were? Why should I spoil you? Because you were Zhu Zheng's niece? I'm sorry, if you continue to delay my mission here, according to the regulations of the region, I'm perfectly capable of making the decision to dispose of you. Zhu Lark was intimidated by Zhang Yi's aura. She really wanted to tell Zhu Jing that Zhang Yi was bullying her. However, on second thought, not only would doing so not cost Zhang Yi anything, it would instead cause Zhu Jing to scold her. Zhu Jing was not a person who spoiled his juniors. Running to him and snitching on him because of such a small matter would only make Zhu Jing criticize and teach her a hard lesson. Zhu Lark bit her lips and clenched her fists, wincing 3 times in her heart, but on the surface, she refused to completely give in. So this captain of yours is just a hypocrite. You just had a problem with Su Nuanqi and I, so you took the opportunity to get back at us. Even if you don't agree with my request, that's all. Why do you have to tease me in a shady way? Does this seem funny to you? Zhang Yi was exasperated by her and laughed. Fake publicity? Did you think I was idle? 148 mouths on the 3rd floor of the Golden Front was carried on my shoulders. He questioned, you think these people on the ship are that obedient? They won't be grateful that we saved them, even if the thought would briefly cross their minds, but later on they'll take it for granted that the officials were sent to save them. And then they'll start to nitpick, and then they'll ask for more. Today you opened a can of worms here by letting the little sissy named Su come and live in the upper cabin and giving her favorable living conditions. So what's the next step? Wasn't it also necessary to take care of her needs in other areas, everything according to your standards? Can the others see this and not have thoughts in their minds? I don't care about the others, let's just say Li Zhongyu and his wife, they were our main rescue target for this operation. People have just been living in the middle floor. What if they make demands too? What if they make trouble? Zhang Yi narrowed his eyes. I'm terrified of that outcome coming about, do you understand? After Zhang Yi's explanation, Zhu Lark slowly realized the seriousness of the problem. One does not suffer from scarcity, but from unevenness. It might not manifest in the beginning, but injustice would accumulate over time to become a big problem. I didn't think that much. Just wanted a companion for myself. Didn't want to cause you any trouble either. Zhang Yi snorted. It's really not easy for you to understand. Otherwise, I'm really afraid of this ship being in chaos. Afraid? Zhu Lark looked at Zhang Yi in surprise. You would be afraid too? He was a famous god of war. After the eclipse as well as the reincarnation squad battle, he became the hero of the entire Blizzard City, with a reputation that once surpassed that of Deng Shintong and the original Gao Changkong. Would he be afraid as well? Zhang Yi nodded. A touch of cloudy coldness swept across his eyes. I'm afraid that killing so many people will dirty my ship. It will be troublesome to clean it when the time comes. He looked at Zhu Lark, his voice devoid of any emotion. I'm a person who's still very picky about my living environment, and the smell of blood affects the quality of my sleep if it's too heavy. Zhu Lark suddenly felt creeped out. From amongst Zhang Yi's eyes, she saw that Zhang Yi was not joking. If the people on the ship made him feel troubled, he would really kill without mercy. Chapter 822 Gratitude. Zhang Yi had convinced Zhu Lark to come to realize how much trouble she might bring with such a move. Although there was some dissatisfaction in her heart towards Zhang Yi's attitude, she was not a completely brainless stupid white sweet. In the end, coming from a family like that, she still had some insight. So she said, well then, just let Su Nuanqi eat with the crew. She won't be treated specially in the future. Zhang Yi laughed, how can that be? His face was solemn as he pointed at Zhu Lark, she's not qualified to eat crew meals. In the future, obediently roll back below during meals. Of course, if you don't mind eating less, you can share some of it with her. But as a punishment, for a week or less, your food supply will have to follow the Rock Flow Group's standards. Zhang Yi wasn't that nice, unless it was to the people in his own family. And to outsiders, he was soft and hard. It wasn't as if his attitude could change just because Jules Arc gave in to a soft talk. Jules Arc huffed and said, "Fine, fine, just do as you say, okay?" What she was angry about was not Zhang Yi's behavior, but her attitude towards her. At this rate, the mission Zhu Jing had arranged for her was feared to be out of reach. Her heart was also despondent. Why, with her charm, it was so much effort to take down a warehouseman. Jules Arc returned to the cabin. Su Nuanqi was still expecting her to fight for some legitimate power for herself. However, Jules Arc told her about Zhang Yi's decision. "This was an extraordinary moment, so you should endure for a while. I can take you to the Jiangnan region headquarters when we disembark and arrange a decent job for you," Jules Arc said indifferently. Su Nuanqi's face changed. Jules Arc raised an eyebrow. "What, are you dissatisfied?" Su Nuanqi hurriedly shook her head. "How could it be? People know that you're the best, senior sister. I'm really sorry for giving you trouble this time." She had a resigned face. After all, people didn't expect that the one surnamed Zhang would be so insensitive to you. No matter what, you are also the personal niece of the supreme commander of the Jiangnan region. He, on the other hand, is just an officer down there. A touch of contempt swept through Su Nuanqi's eyes. "Humph, no big deal. How dare he treat you with such disrespect? I don't think he'll want to move up in the future." She still thought that the outside world was the same as in the past. Jules Arc said helplessly, "The world outside has long changed, and many things are not quite the same as in the past. Including the set of rules you know." Su Nuanqi asked suspiciously, "No matter how much has changed, shouldn't those who are subordinates do their best to please the leaders and their families? In Huashu Kingdom's system, it has always been the case that the first hand has absolute power. It was impossible for that to change." Jules Arc didn't know how to explain it to her. After all, these people from the Rock Flow group had been isolated from the world for too long. They did not yet know what the existence of a top inhuman meant in the outside world. Among some small countries, someone of Zhang Yi's level was in existence like a god. Even the higher-ups of the 6 regions had to try their best to draw them in. This could be seen from the fact that Zhu Jing was more polite to Zhang Yi than his own son. "Anyway, you just listen to me, stay with me in the future and help me bring Tommy. I won't let you suffer." Su Nuanqi changed to a smiling face. "Good sister, where do people have anything to be aggrieved about? I'm just being unfair on your behalf. I'm afraid you'll be bullied by others." Su Nuanqi was a member of the circle, and Jules Arc could naturally see this kind of small tactic of fanning the flames. However, there are some truths that even if you understand in your heart, you may not be able to do so. In Jules Arc's heart, the dissatisfaction with Zhang Yi was still there, and it was still expanding. In the blink of an eye, a week had passed since leaving Rock Flow Island. The order on the Gold Ent front was still relatively smooth and there were no conflicts. Zhang Yi either practiced calligraphy with Zhou Qi in his room between each day, or he was in the cabin observing the order to avoid any restless behavior from the people underneath. The vast majority of these people were content with the status quo, satisfied with the state of being warm and full today. However, there were always some who would have crooked thoughts. The Rock Flow group's side was an 8-bedroom, with the standard 4 bunk beds and a modest table for eating in the center. Li Zhongyu and his wife naturally had special treatment. They could stay in a separate room. But the others weren't treated so well. When it was time to eat at noon on this day, Chef Xia Changming came over and after opening the hatch on the middle level, he shouted, "Let's have a few people come over and get some food." Immediately, someone from each room came over and was in charge of receiving the meals. The standard of food on the middle level was not bad, at least they were able to get some protein supplements every day, and a more substantial meat meal every 3 days, while usually it was mainly canned soy products and rice and noodles. Chef Xia Changming's attitude toward them was nonchalant, somewhat like a pig farmer raising pigs. Chao Haicheng, a former Silla official, approached them with a smile on his face, full of curtness. "Many thanks for your gift, we are grateful to you in our hearts." Every time he came over to receive his meal, he had to give Chef Xia Changming a good blow job. Slipping up was already easy for him. When Chef Xia Changming saw Cha Haicheng, a rare smile appeared on his face as well. I was taking care of your room's allotment, you should be grateful. Cha Haicheng's face changed slightly when he heard this, then his smile became even brighter. He bowed 90 degrees, I will never forget your great kindness. Chef Xia Changming put down the spoon in his hand and followed him towards the center cabin. Seeing this, the other crew members who were eating next to him only laughed playfully. After arriving at the middle cabin, Cha Haicheng walked to the door of their room and happened to meet his wife, Kim Kimmy. Cha Haicheng, who had once served as a high-ranking official in Silla, was very impressive in terms of power and money. And the women around him were always the best. Kim Kimmy was his 9th wife, 32 years old and a former member of Silla's top girl group. Although going through half a year of life on Rockflow Island had left her quite haggard and with extra dark circles under her eyes. However, these were still hard to hide her charm, especially that beautiful figure that could easily make people think. Chef Xia Changming leaned against the hatch and whistled at her. Cha Haicheng hurriedly gave Kim Kimmy a wink. Kim Kimmy understood and walked over with a pleasing smile, skillfully taking Chef Xia Changming's arm before the two of them went to Chef Xia Changming's bedroom. And after each time, she could get a generous reward from Chef Xia Changming. Not only did Cha Haicheng have no complaints about this, he even got extra food for dabbling in his wife's favor. His status in the room all became high, becoming the junior leader specializing in receiving and distributing food. Chapter 823, All Were Talented. As soon as Cha Haicheng entered the room, everyone in the same room looked at him with a smile. Xia Yunfan, a Chinese descendant from Colombia wearing cracked gold-rimmed glasses and an executive of a large conglomerate, laughed. Cha Haicheng, did you let your wife go to a company that cook again? Cha Haicheng smiled in disbelief. He raised his eyebrows and even had a somewhat proud look on his face. You're just envious. Xia Yunfan snorted coldly, I don't have this kind of clumsy interest. Cha Haicheng laughed and placed the food on the table before assigning meals to each person's lunchbox. In the room, a Mediterranean uncle in his 50s, Lu Nancheng, laughed, I admire Mr. Cha's mentality. A great man can bend and bend, so that he can accomplish something. Xia Yunfan frowned, was disgusted by the words of the two men. He picked up his rice bowl, but how is this any different from a pig or dog? Relying on selling a woman's color in exchange for favors was really disgraceful. Cha Haicheng laughed out loud and looked at him derisively. This doesn't sound like the words of someone who lured a rich woman from Colombia by relying on her lustful looks and then got rich by dividing the family's assets through a fraudulent marriage. Xia Yunfan's face changed. Nonsense. How can that be called cheating, a bookish thing, a scheme, then? The entire room was suddenly filled with pleasant laughter. Everyone had come over to receive their food, and being sarcastic and mocking each other had become their daily way of having fun. Hey, Mr. Cha. If you're so generous, why don't you help out your hard luck friends? A man with a brown beard came over and said to Cha Haicheng with a smile. His name was Rudolph, from southern Prussia, and although he was a bit rough-looking, he had a pair of very delicate hands. Cha Haicheng was not the least bit displeased, instead he smiled badly and said, that depends on what kind of price you can come up with. Rudolph's hand flipped towards his pocket and instantly took out a gold Rolex watch. Cha Haicheng, however, shook his head, this thing means nothing to me. You have to give me something really good. Rudolph said hatefully, hell, as a professional pickpocket, I only steal valuable belongings. Yet now they're all useless junk. He huffed and threw the foot gold watch to the ground, then stepped on his big foot, shattering the glass. Cha Haicheng looked contemptuous. Kim Kimmy was an important supply for me now, and I'm going to rely on her to flatter the ship's lords. You guys don't want to touch her. Hey, you guys are too inadequate. At least we've shared a common affliction. Before it was clear that we only needed a bird's leg to get through the whole night. The two men bickered, but there was someone else who was extraordinarily quiet. A Western man with long curly hair and a big beard and a somewhat melancholic look walked over and silently picked up the broken watch, surprisingly studying his dial carefully. And leaning against the wall, Li Zhonyu's colleague, the Columbia man who took the Chinese name by Mo, leaned against the porthole and stared blankly at the sea of ice that was like a huge pool of stagnant water. Why don't they respond to me? I don't want to go to a foreign land. Talisa, is she still waiting for me in her homeland? Is she and the child okay? Bayamo thought of his wife and daughter who were far away in the other direction of the ocean. They were the biggest faith that he had insisted on living until now. Over the course of half a year, he had asked for help from Columbia countless times. Utilizing every avenue he could find, whether it was the Columbia mainland or the Columbia Ocean Force stationed on Rope Island. But these pleas for help were like a stone sinking into the sea, with no news at all. After waiting for as long as half a year, it was unexpected that what they were waiting for was a rescue ship from Huashu Kingdom. If he really set foot on that country, he would have come to the farthest place from home on this planet. In the midst of such a post-apocalyptic world, he didn't know if he would have the chance to return to his hometown again. Hey, Bayamo, what are you fretting about? Rudolph and Cha Haicheng had broken up for half a day, but they didn't get what they wanted. He had no choice but to come over and chat with the melancholy youth. Bayamo glanced at him and said melancholically, I was thinking, do we still have a chance to return to our hometown? These words caused some of the people in the room to fall into the midst of contemplation. Eisenman twisted his head and gave him a deep look, but said nothing. But Rudolph shrugged indifferently. No matter where we go, as long as there are girls and wine, then I can accept it. Xia Yunfan leaned against the wall, his brows furrowed. But I don't like staying in that country. Cha Haicheng glanced at him. Xia, weren't you raised in that country? Xia Yunfan sat up straight with some displeasure, his eyes staring at him as he said, that doesn't matter. The problem was that I am now a citizen of Columbia nationality. Cha Haicheng snorted disdainfully. Even Bayamo, a proper Columbia citizen, couldn't get rescued, so you should have died a long time ago, right? It looks like you're more loyal than someone's native people. But unfortunately, at times like now, no matter where you are being the bottom. So just don't harbor any unnecessary illusions. Xia Yunfan was spoken to like a fried rooster. At that moment, he became anxious. Arguing, he said, what do you know? He stammered, his mouth saying something like freedom, power, and so on. The room was filled with pleasant laughter. However, without Xia Yunfan, they were still having a good time. Cha Haicheng pulled out an egg from his pocket and smiled, then quickly peeled it open and slowly savored it. The others naturally were not treated this way. And some people deliberately made disdainful noises, but were actually envious in their hearts. But they didn't have a beautiful wife like Cha Haicheng who could give them food in exchange. So they had to use this way to act as if they were upright. After a while, Kim Kimi came back from the upper cabin. Cha Haicheng hurriedly greeted her, carefully glanced at the others, and asked her, how was it, what kind of goodies were given to you this time? Kim Kimi smiled proudly, then pulled out a pigeon egg-sized diamond ring from her pocket and showed it to him beautifully. Look! A diamond ring, what a big diamond ring! Cha Haicheng's eyes quickly widened and the person froze on the spot. You were joking with me, right? He said with a leathery smile. Kim Kimi bristled and said carelessly while admiring her large diamond ring with satisfaction, what kind of joke is it with you? People give me diamond rings this big, and you haven't even bought me one this big. Cha Haicheng became anxious and lowered his voice and yelled, you stupid woman. It's such a time when diamonds are worth less than dirt, so what's the point of you wanting it? Chapter 824 Fin Dragon. Cha Haicheng was furious and scolded Kim Kimi fiercely. Kim Kimi was also angry. Hey, what are you talking about? This diamond is expensive, okay? She didn't understand what Cha Haicheng was mad about. Such a big and beautiful diamond could be obtained just by accompanying Chef Xia Changming once. She was all happy and crazy. Cha Haicheng took a deep breath and then closed his eyes tightly. He silently said in his mind, can't be angry, can't be angry, she was originally a stupid woman with eyes full of only money. After calming his emotions for a long time, he stared at Kim Kimmy and pointed at her nose. Next time, get me supplies. Sugar, milk, cigarettes, eggs. Are all fine. Just don't ask me for these useless jewelry. After the end of the world, all of these things had become waste products. Only a vain woman like Kim Kimmy would like them. Kim Kimmy tightened her clothes with some fear. Got it. The fear of Cha Haicheng had been deeply engraved in her bones. At least for now, she hadn't thought of resisting. The upper level of the cabin. A sign of being spied on suddenly arose in Zhang Yi's heart. It was already nighttime at this time. He looked out through the window, and the night was so deep that he could not see anything. There was nothing but endless darkness on the sea. The cool moonlight was blurry and invisible, and through the thick clouds, there were only residual shadows, making it even more difficult to reflect the sea. Zhang Yi frowned. Ever since he had awakened the time echo ability, his intuition had become sharper and sharper. This was especially true for the inside of danger. This realization made him vaguely feel that there was something dangerous in the middle of the sea, spying on them. Was it that sea monster that I injured? Zhang Yi gave that sea monster the name of fin dragon. This was because its back was covered with dorsal fins that were even bigger than a shark's. It was also possible that it was psychological. Zhang Yi thought about it and decided to get up and go over to the control room to take a look. He opened the door and quickly came outside, walking along the corridor to the control room of the Gold Ant front. Have you found anything unusual? Zhang Yi inquired. The control room was manned 24 hours a day. Old Tian was also there at this moment, and when he heard this, he hurriedly came to the radar, and he said to Zhang Yi, no abnormal ships or creatures have been found in the vicinity. It was only half an hour ago that a few sharks passed nearby. Zhang Yi immediately asked, sharks? Are they big in size? Old Tian said, according to the radar, it was just some ordinary sharks over 5 meters long. A giant creature like the fin dragon would definitely be detected by the radar as long as it appeared in the surrounding waters. What is the approximate detection range? Zhang Yi asked. Old Tian replied, underwater, the 200-meter range can detect the movement of creatures within 10 nautical miles. If it was a ship on the surface, it could be detected within 50 nautical miles as long as it wasn't a military ship loaded with stealth functions. Zhang Yi smiled and shook his head. If it really could appear on these waters, it probably wouldn't be a civilian ship. All right, we need to be even more careful on the way back. Send an extra man on night duty. Old Tian said, was. Zhang Yi turned around and intended to leave, but Old Tian called out to him. Mr. Zhang, I have one more thing to report to you. Zhang Yi glanced at him, what is it? Speak up. Old Tian said, it was about Lao Xie over in the kitchen. Old Tian told Zhang Yi in detail. It turned out that there was an increase in the number of people on the ship, and while more than 100 people were eating, Lao Xie was the only one who was busy. Although most of the food was pre-prepared dishes that only needed to be heated to be eaten. But it still needed to be processed and the workload was very heavy. In the last few days, Lao Xie's health was starting to get a little worse. Not today, he came and found Old Tian, saying that he had back pain and hoped that he could be given an additional helper. However, the number of crew members was limited, and everyone had their own jobs that no one could spare. That's why Old Tian told Zhang Yi that he hoped to get someone from inside the lower and middle class cabins to come and help. They only know how to eat with their mouths open every day, and it was time for them to participate in labor. Cook your own food and eat it yourself. Zhang Yi, however, looked at Old Tian playfully and laughed. How did his body deteriorate? Do you really think I don't know? When these words came out, everyone in the control room couldn't help but laugh. Surveillance was installed everywhere on the ship, and Zhang Yi would check it from time to time to avoid any hidden safety hazards. Except for the restrooms and bedrooms, which he did not monitor out of Zhu Lark's strong request, he was basically aware of what happened in other places. These crew members on the ship had been sailing on the sea for too long and naturally had their needs. And amongst this batch of passengers on board, there was no shortage of women who had voluntarily exchanged themselves for supplies. Zhang Yi also understood them, so he did not prohibit this matter. Old Tian smiled. I'm sorry to make you laugh. If you let them cook, can you guarantee the food safety aspect? That's something you have to consider. If someone wants to do something, one slip-up could poison the entire ship. Zhang Yi was very cautious. The food and drinking water he ate was brought by himself and not with the others. So even if something went wrong, it was the other people on the boat. However, as the captain of the ship, he still had to remind Old Tian. Old Tian nodded and said seriously, I will have Lao Xia carefully supervise them. Moreover, even if you want a poison, there has to be raw materials, wasn't it? Toxin was not that easy to obtain. These people on board had all been inspected and had no weapons or unusual drugs on them. After living on the island for most of the year, they were so poor that they were almost down to their pants. Zhang Yi also understood how difficult it was for Lao Xia and nodded, you can make your own arrangements for this matter, find a few trustworthy people. Old Tian laughed. Zhang Yi left the control room and went to the deck. The Golden Front was slowly advancing on the icy sea. In order to hurry up, as well as to avoid accidents on the ocean, the ship's traveling was non-stop around the clock. Just a slight undulation of the icy ocean would trigger huge waves in the eyes of humans, causing the ship to bob up and down. This could easily make people fearful, lest a huge wave would come down and knock the ship over. Zhang Yi walked on the rocking deck as if he was walking on a flat surface. His grasp on the power of space had become more and more pure. Woo! Suddenly, a distant whine came from his ears. Zhang Yi frowned and quickly looked in the direction the sound came from. The night wind was blowing fiercely, and it was unknown whether the sound was the sea breeze or from some mysterious sea beast. Zhang Yi narrowed his eyes slightly. That fellow, did he follow? The power possessed by that huge fin dragon, which Zhang Yi had witnessed with his own eyes, was extremely powerful. If he was on land and encountered that kind of monster, Zhang Yi would not be afraid. He had a clear perception of his own power. However, this was the sea, not the realm of humans. If one was not careful and it destroyed the Golden Front, probably everyone on this ship except Zhang Yi and Zhou Qi would die. This was not the result Zhang Yi wanted to see. Chapter 825 Lu Jingnan. In the next few moments, Zhang Yi strengthened the alert of the entire ship. His attention was focused on the middle of the vast sea of ice. This was because he always had a premonition that the great sea monster fin dragon, which he had seriously injured in the first place, would definitely not let them off easily. Any creature was vengeful, especially powerful creatures were even more so. The fin dragon must be hiding somewhere in the depths of the ocean, waiting for the right moment to attack them. The reason why it was holding its ground at this moment was because it was afraid of Zhang Yi's strength and did not dare to engage in a head-on conflict. However, once the Golden Front had any accidents on the surface of the sea, or Zhang Yi had any abnormal conditions, it might just scurry out from the middle of the 10,000-meter deep sea. With its incomparably large size and amazing strength, it would only need one blow to overturn the Golden Front. At that time, more than 100 people on the ship, except for Zhang Yi and Zhou Qi, was afraid that they would all die. Zhang Yi did not have a better solution for this. The weapons on board lacked heavy firearms. There were only some depth charges and shipboard cannons. However, it was obviously too difficult for these things to inflict heavy damage on that giant beast. Although he still had heavy artillery in his foreign space, it was extremely difficult for land artillery to be useful on a ship. After all, on the ocean, it was troublesome to stabilize a land cannon, let alone shooting against the huge recoil. However, Zhang Yi and the others were not at an absolute disadvantage. Zhang Yi's own presence, as well as the advanced radar system, was the best means of defense. As long as the fin dragon approached to a certain range, it would be discovered by the people on board. Zhang Yi would then be able to take precautions in advance. Nowadays, Zhang Yi, whose alien energy index had reached 9,600 points, was able to defend himself even if he did encounter an epsilon-level inhuman at the beginning level. Not to mention the fact that he had only encountered a sea monster with an alien energy index of 9,000. If it wasn't for the sea, he could have easily killed that sea monster. It was just a pity that the inability to dive was Zhang Yi's biggest shortcoming at the moment. Let's speed up the march. I hope that there won't be any problems on the way back. Zhang Yi's heart prayed so secretly. On the other hand, after Chef Xia Changming received Zhang Yi's permission, he came to the cabin below to pick his helper. In the end, he found a good helper, Lu Jingnan from the Rock Flow Group. Lu Jingnan claimed to be a Chef Xia Changming, and after being tested by Chef Xia Changming, he found that he was indeed a good cook. According to the Rock Flow Group's people, he was in charge of cooking for the team when he was on the island. Coupled with the fact that Lu Jingnan spoke well and was very good at pleasing Chef Xia Changming and the rest of the crew, so he soon became close to the people on the ship. Zhang Yi had been keeping an eye on what was going on in the icy sea for the past few days, wary of fin dragons or other mutated sea monsters appearing. Luckily, the others did not dare to come over and cause trouble for him again after the lesson they had learned earlier. Zhu Lark had kept a much lower profile, and occasionally, he would still come over to deliberately draw close to Zhang Yi. However, Zhang Yi had always disliked this kind of self-righteous young lady, and only dealt with it coldly. This caused Zhu Lark to have a headache in her heart. However, that little follower by her side, Su Nuanqi, on the other hand, had not been treating Zhang Yi very well. She didn't dare to say anything bad, but she just looked at Zhang Yi with eyes that were very wrong. Probably she thought that she was the child of a high-ranking official, so she couldn't see Zhang Yi as the head of the rescue team. Zhang Yi didn't give a damn about her, as long as the others didn't come over to die. He didn't have the time to waste time with them. Ensuring the completion of the rescue mission was his main concern at the moment. And he had made several contacts with Zhu Jing in between. As soon as their ship reached the vicinity of Huashu Kingdom's waters, a warship would go over to greet them. That morning, the crew on this side of the control room were still carefully controlling the ship forward and carefully scanning the surrounding through the radar. On the kitchen side, it was already hot and busy. Chef Xia Changming sat very leisurely on the sofa chair, smoking a black box of Yellow Mountain in his mouth, while holding a cardboard game with a few crew members. The cigarettes were very precious. Of course he didn't get them himself, but was given by Zhang Yi. On the ship, in addition to alcohol not allowed to drink, food, cigarettes, and even children and grandchildren isolation bags, Zhang Yi was thoughtful to prepare for them. It was to avoid the crew from having psychological problems in the middle of a long voyage, which would affect the execution of the mission. So now, every member of the crew was loyal to Zhang Yi, not only out of fear of his strength, but also out of love for this good captain who was sympathetic to his subordinates. As for the work in the kitchen, it naturally fell to Lu Jingnan alone. It was not easy to prepare a meal for more than 100 people. Fortunately, the main busy point was steaming the rice and heating the pre-made dishes. The rest was much easier. Lu Jingnan was in his 50s and was a short Mediterranean. He is tired and sweaty when he is working, but he does not dare to slack off at all. Chef Xia Changming played a 2, then dusted his cigarette ash. On his wrist was a golden Patek Philippe, worth several $1 million. This watch was a filial tribute from Lu Jingnan. Old Lu, you don't look like a hard worker. I didn't realize that cooking was quite neat. Chef Xia Changming won a dozen cigarettes today and was in a good mood. Looking at the busy Lu Jingnan, he casually chatted with him. Lu Jingnan wiped the sweat from his head and said with a nod, "Our family used to be the ones who dared to cater, so of course we have to be familiar with these jobs. How else can we manage it?" Chef Xia Changming and the other crew members naturally knew that those on Rockflow Island, especially Huashu Kingdom nationals or overseas Chinese, were all of unusual status. At the very least, they had to be middle class towards the top. Chef Xia Changming teased, "Seeing your fine skin, you should be a big boss." Lu Jingnan skillfully opened the steamer and tore open a bag of pre-made vegetables before pouring it onto the plate. "What big boss but it was just a family with a few restaurants, just a mixed meal. Head Xia, whatever you command, just use me, no need to be polite." Chef Xia Changming laughed, and a few of the crew members were also wearing unimpressed smiles. Of course they wouldn't be polite with Lu Zhengnan. These people on the ship were all saved by them. According to Zhang Yi, other than the two Li Zhongyu couples, the others were the population that would be sent to various bases in Tianhai City to fill the labor force in the future. Therefore, there was no need to be polite in the slightest. At this time, Zhang Yi was loitering on the deck, and after smelling the aroma of the food, he stopped by to take a look. Seeing this, several crew members hurriedly threw down the cards in their hands and stood up. "Mr. Zhang." Zhang Yi laughed, quite a good mood. "It's fine, you guys go ahead and play. I just smelled the scent and casually came over to take a look." "You really don't say, the aroma of this pre-made dish was quite strong. I'm getting a little greedy just smelling it." Zhang Yi didn't come to the kitchen much, so he walked in and casually took a look. Inside, the hot air was steaming, but it was very warm. Lu Zhengnan rushed over and wiped his hands with his apron while nodding his head to please Zhang Yi. "Good day, Mr. Zhang. Was there something you wanted to eat? Feel free to order, I'll arrange it for you right away from my side."